You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Let's talk about the biggest news developing right now and how it affects the Pacific Northwest. We call it Front Page, and joining me for the first time on Front Page, we're going to run through some headlines together. Greg Kim, now part of the Seattle Times Climate Lab. Yep. How new is that for you, Greg?
It's just a change I made in January.
Yeah, that's very exciting. So you're going to be looking into like local environmental policies, things like that?
Yeah, it's like the intersection of climate, energy, and business. So we'll look at the biggest businesses in Washington State like Microsoft and Amazon and their impacts on climate and energy.
I love it. Well, we've talked many times on the show before. Great to have you in studio. And let's get to our first story on Front Page.
Awesome.
Combating anti-Semitism is a top priority of this Department of Justice and this administration, and we at the Civil Rights Division are the tip of the spear on that.
The Department of Justice is looking into anti-Semitism at the University of Washington. That voice that you just heard is Assistant U.S. Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmeet Dillon, who posted on social media on Monday that she had authorized an investigation of UW's handling of anti-Semitism after learning about an off-campus fundraiser planned this week by Super UW. That's Students United for Palestinian Equality and Return. So this is the group that organized the protest last May that ended up leading to students and non-students occupying an engineering building. There was a lot of damage to that building and equipment. By the way, 33 people were charged with misdemeanor criminal trespass in connection to that protest. What stands out to you, Greg, about this new announcement of an investigation by the Justice Department and allegations of mishandling anti-Semitism at UW?
Yeah, I think what stands out here is that after that incident last year, UW distanced itself from this group, delisted it as a student organization, and this event that's happening now is off campus. So I think, imagine UW is thinking from their perspective, like, we've done everything to say that this is not us. And so they must be asking, like, what more do you want us to do?
Yeah, I mean, they even, apparently, University of Washington contacted social media companies to ask for the UW label on the Super UW pages to be taken down because they say they're not affiliated. It does kind of feel like we've been here before, right? Because there was the Department of Education investigation into anti-Semitism that then led to this settlement involving civil rights training for UW staff and students. By the way, that includes us, University of Washington. We're a self-sustaining service of the University of Washington at KUOW, but we do all have to take the civil rights training now, so we're part of that. I'll just quickly read the university spokesperson Victor Balta's response. He said that Super UW is falsely claiming affiliation with University of Washington. The University of Washington strongly and unequivocally opposes anti-Semitism in all forms. And Balta said the Justice Department had notified the university is conducting a compliance review, and the university will cooperate with the review and provide information and responses. I mean, this is something that it does seem like the university has tried really hard to avoid, but apparently it's not been enough.
Yeah, it seems like they're doing everything they can to appease the federal government's probes into it. And I am curious legally to what extent UW can be held responsible for its students doing things off campus that aren't affiliated with the school.
Yeah, we should note, too, there are other signs that the university has tried to kind of tamp down some speech that's been critical of Israel, at least recently. Professor Arya Fani was removed from leadership of the Mideast Center over allegedly over emails that had to do with Israel's role in the Iran war. So moves that seem to be really focused on avoiding this exact kind of confrontation with the federal government.
Right. In that case, before a bunch of attention or before the federal government said anything about it, they went and did that action
proactively.
Proactively, exactly.
Yeah. I just really quickly want to talk for a second about Harmeet Dillon because I've interviewed her several times. She used to be the head of the Republican Party in California. She is this assistant attorney general for civil rights that's, announced this investigation. And she's always been one of these, what they say, in journalism, we use euphemisms, pugilistic. She's a fighter. She likes to mix it up with people on social media. She likes to throw political punches. She right now appears to be vying to be the successor to Pam Bondi. Mm-hmm. She would really love to be the next U.S. Attorney General when Trump finally picks that next agency head. And to do that, I think in order to succeed in this administration, you have to prove that you are going to go hard at Trump's priorities. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, Harmeet has really changed the direction of the civil rights agency under DOJ. She says, this is a quote from the Wall Street Journal. She says, I don't agree that our job here is to punish the police for doing their jobs. I do not agree that our job here is to protect Black people from discrimination, but not whites and others. That's wrong and unconstitutional and illegal. I don't think that it's okay for us to look the other way when American universities discriminate in admissions. She has opened an investigation into medical school admissions, for example. And anti-Semitism is another one of these goals for this administration to really kind of turn the screws with American universities and try to extract these kind of settlements like what you saw out of Colombia. So we're going to see what happens here. I mean, the investigations in the past, after the occupation of the engineering building, for example, there wasn't really any seeming second act from the Trump administration when they said they were opening an investigation there. This might have other results. We're not sure yet. UW says it's complying. Let's move on to our second story on Front Page.
It's going to take some time to review with the mayor's office all options that we have to protect our ratepayers.
Okay, that voice is Andy Strong of Seattle City Light. He's the director of the engineering and project delivery team at Seattle City Light. And Greg, you broke this story. Andy there is referring to the fact that several companies were exploring building new large-scale data centers in Seattle. And boy, did people have feelings about that after you published that story, Greg. There was a petition to block these data centers that was started by a climate group. Then the mayor came out over the weekend to make a comment about this, floated a moratorium on new data centers. Can you kind of take us back to the beginning? Like, what is being proposed and what has happened since then?
Yeah, these are 5 large-scale data centers that to a size that the city hasn't seen before. And at maximum capacity, they could use about a third of the electricity that the city uses on an average day today.
Wow.
Yeah. And so when I talked to the utility about it, they said that that could impact their ability to meet the needs of existing residents just because of how much electricity these data centers would need. And when I heard about this, I thought there might be a reaction, but I did not expect it to be as swift and as furious as it was.
It was a tsunami.
It was over 50,000 electronic letters sent to elected officials in Seattle. And then the mayor came out over the weekend on Facebook saying, hey, we've heard you, and we're considering a lot of options, including a potential moratorium on new data centers. And that is a much more severe action than I thought would happen immediately. But it's also not new or unprecedented across the country. We're seeing other places do that as well. In Maine, that was the first state that actually enacted a moratorium on new data centers. And we've seen about a dozen other states try to do this, although those efforts have failed. And so it's really interesting to see how much this backlash will prevent data center companies from adding their facilities in different places. And I think another interesting thing is that in the world of AI, there's been a lot of talk about slowing down the rate of progress because of how dangerous the technology could be in the wrong hands, right?
The Skynet argument.
Sure, yeah. And I think what we're seeing is potentially that slowdown is happening at a grassroots level, potentially. These companies aren't able to add data centers as fast as they can, and that might achieve that goal of slowing down AI progress for safety reasons too.
I was perking up my ears listening to a New York Times reporter recently talking about this wave of communities that have started to push back against data centers. We should say they're typically in rural areas, not in cities. But, increasingly they're going to have to be in cities for various electricity and lag issue reasons. But
actually, yeah.
Go ahead.
One thing is that, yes, you're right in that they're usually in rural areas. And that's because that's where land costs are cheap and electricity costs are cheap, and they're looking for any way they can connect, right? The thing about adding them in cities like Seattle is that people started asking me, like, what benefit would Seattle get from having these data centers, right? And that's usually, the answer is like jobs and property taxes mostly, right? And in a small population rural area, that can go a lot further, right? These data centers, if they cost billions of dollars, that might generate like millions to tens of millions in property taxes. That might generate dozens to a few hundred jobs. In a small rural place, like that can go a pretty decent amount. But in Seattle, I think more people are being like, well, that's not worth the electricity or water costs.
Yeah. Especially when you're talking about a third of the load that customers currently use. This one report is apparently making a lot of waves on Wall Street because there's so much expectation on the future of AI and these companies being able to build data centers fast enough to fulfill these expectations from investors: Apple, Meta, Alphabet, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Amazon. This guy named Mikel Vila writes something called the Data Center Watch. He's an AI safety analyst. And he basically follows all these local government meetings and Facebook groups that are trying to organize the resistance to data centers. And the latest number that he found is that at least $156 billion across 48 projects with publicly disclosed values were blocked or stalled amid opposition campaigns. And that was in 2025. And in other places, the opposition has become regulation or legislation, as you say, Greg. What's next here? Like, when will we know if, I guess, the one thing is what the mayor ends up doing. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is, when will we know if these companies even go through with trying to build these data centers here?
The city's utility said that we'll know in the next few months if they formally apply for service in the city. And before then, we'll see what the city's utility and the mayor's office come up with in terms of like the terms under which these large loads can connect. They're going to be talking about making them bring their own power so that the city's utility isn't burdened to find that for them. And so once that framework kind of gets developed, we'll have a much better idea of whether these companies actually want to connect in the city.
That sounds like a pretty high bar, bringing your own electricity. But hey, we'll see what happens. Let's move on to our third story on Front Page.
Every minute I spent with him, I regret and I apologize that I did that.
You know that voice. That's Bill Gates speaking to Australian TV recently. The Wall Street Journal got this scoop. The Gates Foundation, based here in Seattle, plans on cutting 500 jobs over the next several years and has opened an external review of engagement with the late Jeffrey Epstein and policies for vetting and developing new philanthropic partnerships. So the Journal got a copy of an email announcing this to staff. Quick reminder, Bill Gates is set to testify about Epstein before the House Oversight Committee in June. Still unclear if former Attorney General Pam Bondi will ever testify there, because it seems like she might be off the hook now that she's no longer the AG. Gates is going to have a closed-door transcribed testimony. So the fallout continues for not just Bill Gates, but the really, major philanthropic foundation that he helped found. What do you make of this response?
I found it very surprising and thought that the Gates Foundation must have had their backs up against the wall to have launched an investigation into the person their organization is named after. And it just made me curious, like what they're facing in terms of their relationships with their colleagues or funders, that they felt like they needed to do this.
Yeah. And, the idea of philanthropy, I find it interesting when you go through those old files. I'm not a big conspiracy head or like somebody who's delved super deeply, but when you see the emails related to Gates or the Gates Foundation with Epstein, he really liked dangling the possibility of, I have all these billionaire friends. I'm going to bring in a lot of, juice for the organization. Like, philanthropy was a way that he kind of, he used it as a glue, Epstein did, in his social circle and with these rich people. And so the Gates Foundation kind of taking a look at that and being like, okay, how do we vet and develop these new philanthropic sources? Maybe try to avoid this type of relationship, right?
Yeah. And the other thing about this news was that the 500 layoffs were kind of like added to this one news release, but that's kind of separate. They've had looming financial issues for a while as Warren Buffett looks to pull out, as the philanthropic sector looks at maybe not giving away their wealth as easily as they did in the past.
Yeah, philanthropy not as hot as it used to be.
Not as hot as it used to be. And so to me, it felt like two somewhat separate, somewhat unrelated issues coming out all at the same time.
Yeah, that's a great point. It kind of seems like, we talk sometimes about other moves by, either the White House or other elected officials to kind of distract from Epstein news. Mm-hmm. But in this case, it almost feels like the layoffs were bundled in with this Epstein announcement at the Gates Foundation. And it's like, were the Epstein stuff, was that supposed to distract from the layoffs or what? But kind of a flip of the typical dynamic. Okay, we got to get to our last story because this is a real hot one. It's burning up the courts around Seattle. Here's our fourth story on Front Page.
I'm a pickleball player and I play in the city. They are planning to shut down 36 really popular pickleball courts. We're all very concerned and we would like to get a little bit of awareness out there.
That is listener Allison, who called us, left a voicemail on the Soundside voicemail line about Seattle Parks and Rec's recent proposal. The city is apparently floating this plan to kind of keep pickleball and tennis more separate. Mm-hmm. And KUOW's Stella Sun has reported on this. 92 pickleball courts could be reduced to 56 under the plan. Seattle Parks and Rec said the strategy was in response to growing popularity of both the sports. They're reportedly going to be meeting and discussing this on Thursday. Pickleballers are mad, Greg. And
you can hear it in the severity of that listener's voice.
Yes, Allison is upset. What is your relationship with tennis or pickleball? Do you fall on one side of this blood feud in racket sports?
Yeah, I'm not willing to take up my pitchfork on either side of the issue, and I do play both. I probably play tennis more, but I do sympathize with pickleball players. You see them, and there are way more players on the court that are able to occupy a pickleball field than a tennis court. There's kind of like two lonely tennis players compared to like dozens of people swarming on pickleball
Yeah, they're
courts.
Running all over the court, right?
Yeah, and so in terms of public benefit, I see their argument.
I just really quickly want to shout out, first of all, I hope that everybody can play the sport. Apparently, Seattle is building new courts, but they're pickleball courts, but they're going to take a while. I do sympathize with pickleballers losing their courts. I also sympathize with tennis players who are having a really hard time finding places to play because pickleball is so popular. Yeah. Tennis was there first, I guess. Am I going to get flack for saying that? But at the same time, it's like you gave us all these courts, especially during the pandemic. They drew the extra pickleball lines to get people outdoors, and now you're going to take them away? Like, that doesn't sound good. Did you know that pickleball was invented on Bainbridge? Is this common
I did.
knowledge?
I think that is common knowledge at this point, yeah.
Okay.
I'll share another story. I was playing pickleball one time, and there were like 12 people on the court, and these tennis players came by, and they had reserved that court to play tennis. And they were just two people. They came, and they saw 12 people, and then they turned around. They were like, well, I mean, clearly it's more important for these 12 people than these two people. So,
but they had reserved the court?
They had reserved it, right? And so, yes, I mean, the city's trying to make the argument that they're trying to make space for both, but they are intentioned. There's only so many courts. They're hard to get. Yeah. And I think...
Especially on a nice day when it's not raining, court space is at a premium for sure.
Yeah.
Greg Kim, this has been so fun. Thank you very much. Greg Kim of Seattle Times Climate Lab. It's a new beat relatively for him. So any tips or, story ideas for Greg, how can people reach out to you?
They can reach me at grkim@seattletimes.com. And thanks for that shout out, Libby. It's been really fun being on the show.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.